Well, this is Helicon West. We are here to read and to listen and get creative inspiration. It's great to see so many of you here tonight. Glad you're here. Hope to hear from you. The sign-up sheet is right back there on that table. So be sure to, I'll grab it and have it if you want to sign up. Helicon West was created, one of our co-creators is here, Star Coolbrook, was created for exchanging creativity and trying your writing out on a live audience. It's been going for many years, and it's just good to see new people here and people who've come before. So let's give a round of applause to Mitch and Star. Mitch used to set up the sound system, and he's still getting credit for that. Back when we were in like a little sandwich shop downtown and stuff, he's still getting credit for doing that. Thank you to the library also for supplying us with this super steady, regular situation of the room. Yeah, and for publicizing and doing other stuff. And also thank you to, I'm sorry, Weston for taping tonight. Everything's going to be on tape. Okay, so maybe don't go into too much detail if you don't want it to be spread across the internet about your.
It'll be on YouTube, so just go right ahead.
Okay, but if you don't want yourself taped, you can request that the camera be deactivated for your reading. But just be aware of that. When we go into our open mic session, you will have 7 minutes to read whatever you want to read, whatever your poetry or your prose piece is. Just keep it to 7 minutes. What happens at 7 minutes is we just start clapping, and you're clapped off the stage. And if you don't want that to happen, it's not fun, so just be aware of that. So, and then a couple other things. If you have one of these new mobile phones, and you have the Facebook app, I just wanted to show you something really cool that you can do on Facebook. If you got your mobile phone, just do a search on Helicon West, and you'll see the Helicon West Facebook page. It should be, pretty much the first one that comes up. Just click on that, and while you're just right there, just give it a like, and that's it. That's all I wanted to show you. Then the other thing is this. This is the Helicon West Anthology. This collects poetry and prose from people who read here as a guest reader during the first 10 years of the program. And there's stuff in here by Dinty Moore and Catherine Coles and Starr and all sorts of other people. And it's available on Amazon. Don't remember how much it is. $15, which is a bargain at twice the price. I mean, it's just packed, really. So that's why this is always right up here. It's just to remind you that you can purchase it. And I think that's, am I missing anything, Star?
No, that's good.
No broadsides today?
No broadsides today, but next time we've got Ben Gunsberg on the 28th.
Just announcing that he's going to be here on the
28th.
Okay, I'll remind you of that. Are we having a broadside before we?
There are some broadsides under construction. We have a new broadside creator.
Cool. We have a broadside program in Helicon West. It's a great big poster with original art on it, and then usually poetry that's displayed, and it gets hung up around campus. It's kind of a neat way to get published. You can put it on your resume, hang it in your apartment or whatever. Okay, so without then further ado, we will go into our guest reading. Tonight we have Amanda Luzzader, who happens to be married to me.
Yay.
And I happen to be married to her. And she's going to be reading some of her recent work. Amanda is a very talented writer. She has been working in creative writing for probably 7 or 8 years, and recently published this book, Among These Bones, which is a post-apocalyptic genre thriller. She'll read from tonight. I won't spoil anything about that. She was also the president of the League of Utah Writers state organization for several years, and she is now a grant writer at a nonprofit here in the Valley that takes care of kids. She's just super talented, super gorgeous, super smart, and I hope you enjoy her reading. Babe, is there anything that I should mention aside from those things? We were talking at dinner that you have to be careful. It's easy to embarrass an introvert by saying things that, might be negative, like, she leaves her dirty dishes around the house. But it's also easy to embarrass an introvert by complimenting too much. You have to keep it in the middle, keep it right on the center line. So, yes, without further ado, the lovely and talented Amanda Luzzader.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys coming out tonight, especially with it being Valentine's Day. And I just want, and also especially for those who came out specifically to support me, thank you very much. And I just wanted to say, if you're here without a date, you can still take 2 cookies. And as I was preparing for this reading, and thinking about how what I mostly write is end-of-the-world fiction and horror stories, I really couldn't think of a better day than Valentine's Day to be sharing these stories. Or maybe that's just the relationships I've been in. But if I wasn't here reading to you tonight, I saw on Facebook someone was saying that Valentine's Day is a great day to be a waiter, because you can just stick fake engagement rings in every dessert and then enjoy the fun. But I am going to be reading to you from my book, Among These Bones. This was published in September. And just to give you a little bit of background about the story, the premise of the book is that there's been a worldwide pandemic that's almost wiped out the human race. But the government has developed a serum that is able to save people's lives. Unfortunately, this serum also erases all of your memories. And the survivors have to take this serum every year. And so they're operating on 1 year of memories. And the main character in the book is a woman named Allison. And she has a teenage son named Ari. And during the course of the year, her son goes missing. And so she only has until the end of the year to find out what happened to her son before she'll lose her memories when she takes this serum. And then she won't even remember she had a son. So that's the premise of the book. I'm just going to go ahead and start. We crossed the river over a rotting footbridge, then pressed through a thicket of Russian olive. When we came through, we found ourselves at the edge of an enormous meadow of low, gently rolling mounds. With only patches of snow remaining, the meadow was grown with tall, bronze-colored grass that seemed to glow in the sunshine. Off in the distance, a herd of doe deer raised their heads from grazing and watched us. "Wow," I said, "pretty." The only signs I could see that people had ever been there were on the far edge of the expanse, where a few yellow-orange bulldozers and some trucks stood idle in the otherwise pastoral setting, and even the machines were grown around with weeds and saplings. It was some abandoned excavation, now almost obliterated by nature. I walked into the waist-high grass and let the sun warm my face. "Al," said Chase from somewhere behind me, "hold up a sec." I turned. Chase had stopped. His hands were on his hips, and he looked at the ground with a frown. He took a few steps, kicked at something. "What is it?" I asked. "What's wrong?" He bent down and wrested something from the soft ground. It was a sneaker. I chuckled. It was just so random. What's that doing here? His eyes had darkened and his lips were pressed into a hard line. On second thought, let's go back and follow the river down, he said. Back that way, I asked as I walked toward him. Won't that take forever? And it'll take us closer to the highway. There could be patrols. It's just, that's when I saw it. A human arm and a hand, just bones pressed into the earth and almost obscured by the grass. There were a few shreds of shirt sleeve and a wristwatch, its metal parts covered with green and white scales and corrosion, loosely circling the bleached white wrist. Then I looked across the meadow, noticing for the first time that the rolling mounds were orderly, evenly spaced. What is this place? I said. Let's go back. I walked on. The meadow whispered as wind shushed through the blades of grass. Al, really, said Chase. The ground was littered with tattered and half-buried artifacts, bits of clothing, a pair of crushed eyeglasses, purses, and the shoes. Hundreds of shoes. There were bones, of course, showing brightly in the sun, femurs, ribs, the round caps of skulls, all of them disarticulated and scattered, my stomach twisted. We came to one of the mounds. It was only 12 feet tall. I crested it and counted 10 more ahead in long rows. I raced over them with an urgent curiosity. The little herd of grazing deer fled into the tree line at my coming. Across the meadow there was another row of the mounds, and another beyond. Chase followed me, but at a distance. Then I reached the bulldozers and saw what they had excavated years ago. The contours of the grim worksite were softened by erosion and the prolific grass, but it wasn't hard to figure out. A shallow, empty trench, and beside it a pile of pushed-up earth. Bulldozers still standing by to push it back into place. The trench was 30 or 40 feet wide, and its length was 3 times that. On the near side of the trench, the grass grew unevenly. I knew what I would find there, but I had to know. The remains of hundreds of people, lined up and stacked, disturbed now by scavengers and the elements, but it had once been a wall of corpses awaiting interment in hasty industrial graves, the final abandoned project of the society that was. The skeletons lay intermingled now, each bone belonging to all. Weeds grew up through eye sockets and between the startling white ribs, and all picked clean, first by birds and mammals, and finally by maggots and beetles and ants. So many skulls they formed a whited cobblestone path. So many toes and foot bones they lay piled like reefs of gravel. Child-sized skeletons in once brightly colored coats were cradled in between the adults. Decaying clothing melted over them all like dripping rags. Ari and I had visited their houses, ransacked their belongings, street after street, block after block, and I'd wondered where the people had gone to. I looked back at the mounds I had crossed and the field of human debris beyond that, the remains of those who were dumped with even less care. They were here. At last, I'd found them. I'd often envisioned them outside somewhere, evacuated past the zone boundaries, living lives that were at least somewhat normal and happy, and remembering how lucky they were, I'd think. But they never got out. The dead lay here by the tens of thousands, so many of them that the toil of burying them had surely turned desperate and sloppy and enormously repugnant to those who were left to do it. And the open trench and pile of unburied dead was a final testament that it was a job that ultimately went unfinished. The rest of us, living in miserable circumstances without memories and only little hope of something better, it turns out we were the lucky ones. So I'm sometimes asked where I got the idea for this book. And really, it was from Facebook. It was probably about 5 years ago. It was back when the first case of Ebola was detected in the United States. And it was all over the news because it was causing quite a bit of panic at the time that Ebola was in the United States. So as I'm scrolling through Facebook, I'm reading these news articles about Ebola, and then I come across this video that someone else had posted, and it was this girl who'd been in a bike accident, and she'd hit her head, and she had amnesia, and her friends were asking her all these questions, and some questions she could answer. She knew her name, she knew random facts, but then they would ask her, like, who am I, and where do you live? And she couldn't answer those questions. And so it was the combination of seeing those things together, this Ebola news information and then this video on amnesia, that they mixed together in my mind. And I thought, what if there was some illness and you could get immunized against it, but erased your memories? And so I wrote a short story about it, way back when, 5 years ago, and brought it to my writing group, and Chad actually convinced me that it had to be a novel. And then lots of work later, it ended up being a novel eventually. So in this next section that I'm going to read from the book, Allison's son Ari is already missing by this point. She's looking for him, and she's gotten some information that a certain person named Ruby might be able to help her. And she's gone to an amusement park because that's where Ruby's supposedly at. So she's at an abandoned amusement park looking for Ruby. The muddy water was deepest in the dark center of tunnel, where its drainage had no doubt been choked by garbage and sediment. As I sloshed along, worrying that the filthy water might overtop my boots, I became all at once aware that I was not alone. I glanced up, and there where the shadows were deepest, I thought I saw the silhouette of a man leaning against the wall of the tunnel near the far end. I stopped short and held my breath. Then I couldn't see him. I cocked my head to one side and squinted. I swallowed hard and said, "Someone there?" The figure pushed off from the wall. "Who wants to know?" he asked. A lanky, greasy-looking man unveiled himself from the dark and came my way through the muck. I stepped back, my hands curled into fists. As if the man's mere presence in the dank tunnel were not enough to make me recoil, as he came closer, I saw that his face was scarred by a livid gash that ran from his forehead down through one eyebrow and into the unkempt scraggle of his beard. In his bony fist, he held a bowie knife. All my energy was building inside me to run. I felt like a compressed spring ready to release, but then I pictured myself running through the unfamiliar and tangled maze of the park, with its snowbanks and walkways blocked by weeds and debris. I imagined the man giving chase. He probably knew the place better. He could probably run faster than me. And what if he had accomplices? In the firmest, steadiest voice I could manage, I said, "Stay back." "You shouldn't be here," he said. "You stay back." "What are you doing here?" "None of your business," I said. "Well, it is now." He came forward, covering the distance between us in 3 or 4 quick strides. I swung my fist at him, but he deflected it without much effort. Then he grabbed my coat and brought me to heel as though I were a misbehaving child. I tried to pull myself free of him, but the grip of his hand was like some great iron clamp. He pressed me against the wall and showed me the knife. "Quit fighting," he said. "You're coming with me." He kept the scruff of my coat in his balled fist and dragged me from the tunnel. I stutter-stepped and staggered along behind. I tried fighting him, but he kept me off balance and tripping. We came out of the tunnel on the other side of the Ferris wheel. The man towed me along a pathway that ran behind the rides and down a flight of concrete steps. "Let go," I hollered at him. "Where are you taking me?" He gave me another jerk, harsh enough to hurt my shoulder. He was tall and strong. "Shut your mouth." We approached what appeared to be the rear entrance of a low-slung brick building. Between 2 dumpsters, there was a single metal door. The man looked around as if to ensure that no one was watching, and then pounded deliberately 3 times on the door. It opened, and another man stepped partway out. He was short and mostly bald with a big black beard. "Who's this?" he said. "Just get her inside," said the other. The bald man did as he was told, and they dragged me in. My legs turned into water then, and I collapsed, sobbing. I kicked and swatted at them. It had little effect. They tried dragging me deeper into the building, but I screamed and caught hold of the door jamb. The tall one plucked my hands from the door, and the short one got my legs. They wrangled me inside and shut the door. Then the only light to see by was that which filtered in from the small high windows, but I know I saw a human skull impaled on a spear, then another, then a line of them, like a fence. I twisted hard, and they dropped me, and so I thrashed and thrashed. They picked me up again, but my foot connected with someone's groan. "Ow, Jesus, fuck!" The bearded one squawked. "Glenn, hold up. Chica just nailed me in the cojones, man." They dropped me, but the one called Glenn stepped on me and leaned forward until his weight compressed my rib cage. The other one bent over and steadied himself, his hand on the wall. He blew hard through his pursed lips as he reached down between his legs and gingerly readjusted himself. "Glenn, man," he said between gasps. "Who is this anyways?" "Caught her sneaking around up by the tunnel," said Glenn, jerking his chin. "Well, chill for a second, will ya? I think she thinks we're going to rape her." Glenn snorted and took his foot off me. He crouched down and jabbed at my face with his finger. "You're the one who's snooping around. I got a wife." The bearded man knelt beside me. "Chica," he said, "you don't look like no spy. Who are you?" "Who are you?" I spat back. He stood up and ran a hand over his bald head. "Well, fair enough. I'm Carlos." He touched his chest with his palm. "This is Glenn. He got a temper, but don't be scared of him. Now, who are you?" I'm looking for someone, I said. That's not really what I asked, but okay, said Carlos. Who? You wouldn't know her. Now let me leave. Carlos shook his head slowly. We need to know why you was out here. I told you I'm looking for someone. Glenn lunged and bellowed at me. Who? Carlos got between us. Her name's Ruby, I blurted. She told me to come. Their eyes widened and the two of them traded a hard look. Glenn licked his lips. Jesus, chica, said Carlos. Why didn't you just say so? So around Halloween, my husband Chad and I were realizing that we both had several short horror stories that we'd written, and so for Halloween we decided it would be fun to put them together in a collection. So we have this book of 13 deeply creepy short stories called Creep Factor, and we call it Creep Factor because a lot of the stories aren't like horror, like scary, but more the uncomfortable feeling you might get when you have a weird coworker or someone who's just acting a little bit off. So Creep Factor was just a fun project that we did, and we've decided we're going to continue it. So each year on Halloween, we're planning to do a collection of short horror stories. And since it's Valentine's Day, I almost said Halloween. Since it's Valentine's Day, I thought I should read at least one love story. So the love story is coming from Creep Factor. And this short story is called Power Couple. I've had other girls, sure. I've had girlfriends and crushes and flings. I had a torrid love affair once. I've had friends with benefits, and one time I even had an enemy with benefits. I've had some of the most excellent girlfriends a guy like me could ask for, but none of them were like Julia. None of them were even close. Julia was on a whole other scale. Just thinking about her made my heart want to explode, and it affected other parts of my body too. So it's hard to say what I liked so much about her, hard to say what it was I couldn't do without, which I guess is why I knew I had to end it. I had to break up with her. Julia was beautiful, sure she was. Best looking girl I ever went out with, by far. Long, silvery blonde hair, delicate features, and almond-shaped eyes that I thought at first were gray, but she told me were hazel. I'd never gone out with someone with hazel eyes. They had a way of piercing you, hypnotizing you. And with the combination of the eyes and Julia's high cheekbones, the description that always came to my mind was barbarian princess. She had that kind of wild barbarian look to her, only more fine, more delicate. Oh, and apparently she had eyebrows that other girls would die for. When I showed my sister Madeline a picture of Julia, she said, "Oh my God, that girl's got fierce brow game." I agree with the fierce part. Making out with Julia was like making out with a small, savage creature. She didn't just kiss, she pushed into me, consumed me, wrapped around me like the ivy vines on the walls of the student center. She was strong and tall. Being with Julia was intoxicating, addictive, like the smoothest liquor, the best drug. I didn't think I could ever get enough of her. And it's crazy how much and how often I thought of her because sometimes it was nonstop. Julia this, Julia that. It started as soon as I got up in the morning. I'd get up and think, which shirt would she like best? What shoes? I'd sit in my Origins of Man class and think, what would Julia think of Professor Ashpodel? He's so uptight. And the funny thing is, I felt like someone else when I was with her. She really did make me better. When I was by myself, no one noticed me or wanted to know anything about me. But when I was with Julia, we were like one of those power couples. She made my stock go up. We were more than the sum of our totals. I know I'm being all calm about this, but I was devastated that it couldn't last. Kelton told me, "You need to make your move, bro." Kelton's my best friend. He said, "She's hot, she's smart, she's seriously and completely out of your league, and she's into you. You never stop talking about her, so make your move. Marry her, move in with her, whatever, bro. Figure out your move and play it." I should mention that Julia had a dark side. For some reason, she reminded me of a rainy day, or a day when it seems like it should be raining, but it isn't. And I love that about her too. Madeline once told me, I actually find her a little intimidating. Really, I said? Julia intimidates you? No, I guess maybe intimidating isn't the right word, she said. Imposing? I can see that, I said, though I thought the word bewitching might be better. But that's not why I had to break up with her. It had been a mistake to let things go so far with Julia, to let things progress that way. That's the thing. I knew I was falling for her. Sure I did. God knows why she fell for me, but I knew that was happening too. I should have put a stop to it earlier, like with the others. Wendy, for instance, was so good to me, would do anything for me, but as soon as I realized that she wanted to make things permanent, that was my signal. I put an end to it. Carla was stunning, especially when she wore an updo and showed cleavage, but I ended that right after the third date. Britt made me laugh every time we talked. She was so smart and funny. I dumped her. And all the others, Brooklyn, Catherine, Casey, Katie, Sammy, Soraya, Mariah, Marianne, Joanne, and Jacqueline. I broke it off whether I wanted to or not. I couldn't make exceptions. Julia was the best I'd ever had, but there could be no exceptions. I looked at my calendar. First Monday in June. I'd end it before that. I told Kelton, I told Madeline, well, Madeline, it's your life. Ruin it however you want to ruin it. Your brain is messed up, bro, said Kelton. What, you think she's too good for you? They were both kind of right. Sure they were. Madeline thought I'd ruin my life if I let Julia go. What she doesn't understand is that my life is already so complicated, you could say it's ruined already. Look, I know that I'm only a 5 or 5.5 on the boyfriend scale. On a good day, when my hair looks good and I'm wearing my favorite shirt, you might catch me thinking of myself as a 6, but that's where I top out. And I realize looks aren't everything, but I also have no money. I deliver pizzas, I'm a history major with student loans. I don't know how it happened, but I don't see myself on the super fast track to fabulous wealth. And all the other things that might compensate for my lack of looks and money, yeah, I don't have those either. Natural leader? Nah. Hopeless romantic? Please. Snappy dresser? Take another look. Sensitive, ambitious, deeply empathetic, artistic, rich inner life? None of the above. I can't even cook. I'm not saying Kelton is exactly right either, that Julia's too good for me. I think every person should have a say in who is too good for who, and Julia would never say that she's too good for me. In fact, she said the opposite on a regular basis. I'm so lucky I found you, she once said to me. I am not making this up. But there are things Julia doesn't know about me, big, important, complicated things. Things I just cannot tell her, and that makes it unfair. You have to know everything about a person before you can make an informed decision about whether you're too good of a person for that person. See, I've got a dark side too. I don't mean I brood and smolder like Julia. I've actually done things. I've got priors. And I'd be crushed if Julia ever found out. So it's not exactly that Julia's too good for me, it's that she doesn't realize she deserves someone better. But I do. Sure I do. She deserves better. And yeah, maybe I top out at 6.5 or 7 on the boyfriend scale. And yeah, maybe that's only because I'm decent in bed, but I've got heart. And I'm at least a half-decent human being, and so I'm making the call on Julia's behalf. Kelton, you're an idiot, bro. You're an idiot, you're an idiot, you're an idiot. Madeline, you need to think about this for a long time, like a really long time. They don't understand. They don't understand me because they don't really know me either. Of course they don't, not completely, because if they did, they would understand. And I'd like that, but I'd hate it too. Because they'd want nothing to do with me either, just like Julia if she knew. How terrible would that be? My sister and best friend and my girlfriend? No, it's got to stop. I marked it down. It was on the calendar, first Monday in June. But there was a problem. We had a date, me and Julia. I'm usually so good with keeping track because this girl, Carrie, I dated for a while, showed me how to use Google Calendar. At first I thought it was stupid, but after I broke up with her, I started looking into it more closely, and I honestly don't know how I survived without an online calendar. I mean this in a very literal sense. A guy like me really plans everything on a monthly basis, right down to the very hour, and so it was a perfect fit. I have no idea how this happened, but I forgot to put down that I was going to the goddamn Parade of Homes with Julia, and you guessed it, the first Sunday in June. You may not know what the Parade of Homes is. It's not an actual parade. There are no floats or anything. It's just this home decor thing where people buy tickets to go to the ritzy part of town and walk through all the rich people's mansions. I know. It's all messed up. All the broke-ass people paid the people who already have plenty of money to go and live inside their houses. But I never miss it. I go every year. I don't care about floor runners or staircases or intelligent shower heads. I hear people say pergola a lot when I go, and I don't know what that is. I have my own reasons for going to the parade, thank you very much. Let's just say I'm a big fan of home security systems, and I like to check the latest technology in broad daylight, especially in that particular neighborhood. Here's the problem. A white male, impoverished history major who ranks at the very maximum 7 or 8 on the boyfriend scale has a way of seeming, I don't know, odd, out of place when attending the parade unaccompanied. That's why I always need a date. And I had one this year, I just forgot to put it down in my Google Calendar. You really want to go? I asked Julia. Oh my God. Yes, she said. I've been looking forward to it since April. This was terrible. I needed to be done with Julia before that Monday. Not just for my sake, but for hers too. Ideally, it'd be several days before, and even better would be a week before, but breaking up one day beforehand could present certain complications, again for Julia and for me both. I had no interest in ruining my own enjoyment of the parade. I planned on many happy returns, and breaking up with Julia was going to be the worst breakup ever. I didn't want the two associated. But what could I do? I picked up Julia at 10 a.m. sharp. I didn't want to be late. There were so many promising homes this year, and I wanted to see them all. But I was also filled with a sense of dread. Walking around the parade with my very soon-to-be best ex-girlfriend ever gave me a deeply conflicted feeling, and Julia could tell. Derek, what's the matter with you today? She said. Did I do something to upset you? It seems like something's wrong. No, babe, I told her, everything's okay. Whoa, look at those motion sensors. The emitters are so tiny, but they cover the entire yard. Safety for you has really upped their game. All the homes had incredible new systems that year. It was the year Maximum Klaxon launched the Ear Splitter 900. Keep 'em Out Incorporated had a new high-res doorbell cam, and Happy Tase was showing the latest and well-mounted household tasing devices. But I couldn't hide from Julia. Why don't you just call me later, okay? She said. Something's obviously wrong, but since you won't tell me, I'm just gonna go. I pulled her into a brand new panic room. It was gorgeous. Tasteful paneling, a 52-inch Sony, and it had that new panic room smell. But I told her, you're right, babe. I'm sorry, I should have been straight with you. This just isn't working out. What? Her face went pale. Derek, what is it? What did I do? What happened? I tried to tell her that it wasn't her, it was me. And I really meant it. It was me, obviously. I couldn't be with someone. Every 29 and a half days, I could barely be with myself. I wasn't happy about it. I wanted to be with Julia. I wanted to be normal. But that wasn't how it was. Derek, you're making a mistake, she said. We belong together. You know it, I know it, we both know it, and I love you. That really hurt. I'd said the words I was about to say to Julia a gajillion times to other girls. Sure, I had. But that doesn't mean it ever got easier, and with Julia, it was the worst ever. Jules, I said, clearing my throat and taking a deep breath, listen to me. I don't want to be with you. I don't want to see you again, ever. I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to text you. I don't even want to see an email from you. People never email anymore, I know, but you'd be surprised what a girl who's had her heart broken by a guy who is at best an 8.5 will do to unbreak it. Julia stared at me, the fierceness of her hazel eyes softened by her sadness. Thick, gooey tears quivered in her eyes and rolled down her face, and she ran away. My barbarian princess was gone. I didn't finish the parade. My heart wasn't in it anymore, and there wasn't a lot of time anyway. So I went to the Safeway, bought 40 pounds of beef, went to my apartment, and took off all my clothes. As the sun went down and the sky in the east began to glow with the silvery light of the moonrise, I thought about Julia. Some of my other breakups have been difficult to get past, difficult to forget. I say that Julia would be the hardest to forget, but that'd be wrong. I'd never forget Julia. Of course I wouldn't. Then there was a knock at the door. It was a soft knock at first. Had happened to me before, but I'd always arranged my schedule so that aside from the occasional stray Mormons, I'd never be visited at this time of the lunar cycle. The few random people who'd blundered into knocking on my door at this pivotal moment would either end up as a meal or they'd go away after a few minutes, but I knew this was no random person. The knock got louder, and then I heard her voice. "Derek, open up. I know you're there." You see what I mean now? Girls would do nutty things after a breakup. That's why the date was so dicey. That's why I needed to end it before. Breakups sometimes have a transitional zone when you're neither together nor broken up. Anything could happen, but I couldn't see her, not now, and not any time within the next 24 hours. I waited. "Derek, I can hear you." Bullshit. I was on the couch, 12 feet from the door, sitting utterly still and barely breathing. She'd have a better chance at hearing a mouse crawling along the baseboard in the next room. "Derek, I know you're there, and if you don't open this door, I'll do something crazy. I'll call the cops, or your sister, or I'll break down this goddamn door. I can do it." Shh. Break down a solid core red oak laminate security door with a Clapco D29 deadbolt? Not likely. But she might call Madeline. That could get awkward in a hurry. I glanced out the window. I had maybe 30 minutes. Definitely no more than that, and very likely less. The change wasn't exactly something you could set a watch by. I fastened the door restricting chain and opened the door as much as it could go, only about an inch. Then I peered through the space. Julia had been crying. I could tell that from her voice, but now I could see her eyes were reddened and her face was blotchy. "You're a liar, Derek," she said, a little sob catching in her voice. "You want to be with me and you know it." "You need to leave, Julia," I said, my voice breaking. "We're through. For good. I'm closing this door and you're going to go home." My skin was getting warm and itchy. My teeth and gums ached. I didn't have time for this. "No," said Julia, her voice suddenly low and imposing. "You're going to let me in." I almost did, too. I almost unlatched the chain and opened the door to let her in. Her voice had changed. And then I looked at her eyes, and they were changed as well. Her face wasn't blotchy from crying. She was transforming. I fumbled with the door chain, but my fingers were thickening, growing gnarled and hairy. By the time I got it unlatched and swung the door open, half of Julia's clothing lay in tatters on the entryway of my apartment. In another moment or two, we stood before each other, two animals, two children of the night. With her sleek coat, brilliant, flashing fangs, and exquisite tail, she was even more beautiful now than I'd ever seen her. I guess you could say we got back together that night. I don't know how many girlfriends I'd had, a couple dozen, I guess. Playing the odds that way, this was bound to happen sooner or later. I was sure to find someone to really love, someone I could be myself with. I'd never thought about it, had never watched for it, but I knew I'd never need to find another date for the parade ever again. We stood there in the middle of my apartment for a moment, circling one another, and then, as if there'd been some signal we could only hear, we embraced in a fearsome, animalistic embrace that could have torn any mortal girl or guy to pieces. We sank to the floor, sank into one another, and were consumed with the wildest of beastly passion deep into the midnight as the moon beamed in through the windows. Hours later, as we lay entwined on the floor, I saw the hunger in Julia's eyes. I was starving myself. I'd never waited so long to feed. I decided to stay in my apartment that night and tried to be content with the raw grocery store beef I'd stacked neatly on the kitchen table. Julia briefly regarded it with obvious distaste, and then she looked back at me. Her hazel eyes said, "Let's run together into the night and we'll feed." And so we did. So this last piece I'm going to read is actually from the second book in the Among These Bones series. That book is called When It's No Longer Night. Is that right? It's very new. This second book has not been released yet, but I can tell you it's going to be released very soon. I don't have the exact date of when it's going to be out. Could be tonight, could be tomorrow, could be in a few weeks, but very soon. So I can't tell you very much about the second book without spoiling the first book. So I'm not going to say anything about it other than the story continues, and this is a scene from the second book. According to some embedded memory from when I'd learned to drive, I'd been dutifully driving all day on the right side of the highway. Not even the agency's memory-killing drug could suppress such habits, not just regarding driving, but how to hold a fork and knife, how to write, or how to throw a baseball. This occurred to me all at once. I'd been obeying long-dead traffic laws from a civilization now extinct. And so I let the car drift into the center of the road until I drove directly over the center line. I even felt the need to justify this violation, telling myself the center of the roadway was smoother and less sprouted with weeds. I felt the odd thrill one feels when willfully breaking well-established rules. Out of the same set of deeply ingrained habits, I'd been checking my rearview mirror periodically, and for the first time that day, I saw something. There was some kind of vehicle on the road behind me. The dark object had crested the large hill I'd passed over minutes before, and I saw it for only a moment as it was silhouetted against the sky. However, at first, I did not even register this as a threat. I'd fallen into a sort of daze, senses dulled by hours of driving and fatigue. Nothing, evidently, could have seemed more natural to me than seeing a car in my rearview mirror. It was only a few seconds later that it dawned on me just how much danger I suddenly faced, but the vehicle had disappeared into the folds of the land that lay between us. I kept my eyes on the mirror for so long that my car kept creeping toward the shoulder. I pressed on the gas pedal. I'd been told there might be raiders out here, wild people who'd slipped the agency's grasp but took a wholly barbaric approach to survival. I now had the speedometer at 85 miles per hour and fluttering up to the mark indicating 90. Weed stalks whacked alarmingly against the bumper and the tires banged against the potholes in the road's weathered surface. I worried for the tires, the suspension, the entire automobile, but I couldn't slow down. According to the little LED dash clock, I'd driven 15 minutes and therefore about 20 miles without seeing the dark spot behind me again. Was there really some murderous raiding party behind me, masked in the folds of the road, or had I simply imagined it? Had it been just a trick of the heat that was beginning to wobble and refract on the pavement as the day warmed? Then it reappeared. As I swerved around a long bend and onto a straight flat section, the vehicle was in the mirror again, much closer now, maybe just a mile back. It was a pickup truck. I sped up. The car bumped and boomed horribly over the crumbling road. What could they want? I forced myself to think rationally. It was definitely not an agency or Lotus vehicle. Even from this distance, I could tell it was a truck of significant age, and my gut told me I still hadn't driven far enough to encounter any agency personnel. I still was only a little more than halfway through the gasoline. Could it be someone from the camp? No. I'd seen all the vehicles in their small fleet, and they had no pickups like this one, and they could never have caught up to me so fast anyway. This narrowed the possibilities to two. It could be someone without ill intent, just another drifting survivor who'd happened upon the same stretch of highway, but what were the odds of that on so remote a road, and why would they want to overtake me? A raider then, someone who meant to kill me. After a few more minutes, I saw the truck more clearly. The rearview mirror vibrated violently, but I could tell the truck was a genuinely ancient model, perhaps older than me. Its panels and fenders were crumpled and so rusted and dirty that the truck was neutral gray-brown of the surrounding land. Neutral gray-brown of the surrounding land. It was also close enough that I could hear the growl of its motor, and I saw a blackish-blue trail of exhaust pouring from the tailpipe, and it was still gaining. Between the jiggling mirror and the truck's hazy, cracked windshield, I could not clearly see the driver. It may have been an old woman or a young boy, for all that I could tell, hunching darkly behind the wheel. Then a man rose up from the bed of the truck and stood behind the cab. The rags he wore and his long wild hair whipped crazily in the wind, and he had something in his hands, something long and black, a rifle, I assumed. I had pressed the gas all the way down, waiting for the Subaru to shake into pieces. If it were not for the seatbelt, I might have bounced right out of the seat, and it was difficult for me to stay on the road. Something struck the car with a thump. The man had started shooting. There was another thump, then a third, but we'd entered a series of tighter turns, and I couldn't look back. Together we hurtled down the road at sickening speeds. The loose pavement against the underside of the car made a fearsome racket that drowned out the sound of the engine. I chanced to glance in the mirror and saw the truck's headlights were now only a few feet from the Subaru's bumper. Then came a loud hissing crash, and the black window shattered in a blizzard of pebbled safety glass. Without another thought, I stomped as hard as I could on the brake. Maybe it was panic, or maybe it was some canny tactical impulse arising from my reptilian brain. I pressed my head into the seat back, locked my elbows to brace against the wheel, and practically stood on the brake pedal. The car shuddered madly as it slowed, and an instant later the truck rammed the rear of the Subaru with a dreadful crash. My eyes flicked to the mirror again, and I saw the man who'd been standing in the truck bed was now floundering there, his legs in the air. I downshifted and floored the gas, putting some yards between me and the truck. The truck accelerated too, its back tires squalling on the loose roadbed and the growling engine louder now through the gaping back window. I spotted tendrils of white smoke coming from under its hood. When I gained a few hundred feet, I fumbled furiously for my backpack. It lay upside down on the floor of the passenger side. Keeping the gas pedal pinned, I grabbed the pack and hoisted it upright onto my seat. But the engine revved, demanding I shift into a fourth gear. After clumsily shifting, I tore out the top of the pack to retrieve my pistol. Smoke billowed from the truck's engine, and I thought if I could just keep it behind me for a few minutes, it might slow down or stop running altogether. Instead, it gained on me, engine roaring madly. This time, it came alongside the Subaru on the passenger side. My head swiveled from the road to the truck and back as we thundered down the road. The man in the bed of the truck was on his feet again. He was gaunt and spindly and filthy. His face was deeply tanned and lined with desperation. Woven into the tatters of his clothing and strands of his hair, I saw what must have been small bones, finger bones or toes or molars. They whipped and blew around him. Then I saw that it was not a rifle he was shooting, but a hunting bow, with heavy fiberglass limbs and pulleys and cables. Standing with his feet far apart, he drew the bow back, aimed at the Subaru, and let an arrow go. It came through the roof on the passenger side at a shallow angle and froze there, its sharp-bladed tip only a foot or so away and pointed directly at me. The truck pulled slightly ahead of me now. The driver was likewise gaunt and wild-looking. She turned and leered at me savagely. I leveled the pistol and fired at her through my passenger side window, which erupted into powdered glass and was gone. In the small space of the car, the gunshot deafened me, but there were finger-sized black dimples in the driver's side door. I fired a few more times, and now the driver's side window of the truck vanished in a glittering spray of shattered glass, and the driver slumped out of view. The truck slowed and careened away to the right, but in my peripheral vision, I caught a flash of dark motion, and I knew the man had hurled himself from the truck bed. A half second later, there was a heavy metallic thump as he landed on the Subaru's roof. I stood on the brake again and braced against the wheel as the car practically stood up on its front end, tires squelching hotly against the pavement. The man flopped across the windshield and hood, but he avoided sliding off the front of the car by hanging onto the roof rack. His face was pressed against the windshield, and I saw his eyes blaze with fiendish triumph, knowing the thin sheet of glass was all that remained between us. As I tried to shift gears, I fumbled for the gun, and it fell between the seats. I downshifted, hit the gas, and popped the clutch. The car bucked forward, but not only did the man not slide off the hood, he hauled himself to his feet. I floored the gas and felt around for the pistol. Then, with his hand still on the roof rack, the man hopped into the air, stomped through the windshield, and came bashing boots first into the car as the engine revved. I screamed, let go of the wheel, and came up at last with the pistol. In the close, awkward space, I gripped the gun in both hands, pointed the barrel at the man's chest, and pulled the trigger. It only clicked. So in conclusion, I just want to say thank you again for letting me read and for coming out to Helicon West today. And I did want to let you know that both Creep Factor and Among These Bones are available on Amazon for sale now. They are in Kindle Unlimited if you are one of those subscribers. And I also have copies available with me tonight if you want to purchase one after the reading. And thank you. Questions?
Can I just ask you how many books are in this series?
There's going to be 3. Yeah. Thank you.
Great job. Another hand for Amanda Mabel. We'll now go into open mic. With that, we have 6 readers. Is it, anyone who came in late want to sign up? Some people came in over here. Yes, no. Okay. Well, we'll go 2 at a time. It looks like we have first up Pam Loosely and Diane Hardy. Come on up in that order.
Do I need to introduce it at all or just read?
It's your reading.
Read.
Okay. People looked at her differently after they first found out that she had survived being hit by lightning. It was a combination of feelings: awe, respect, reverence, and confusion. I was 8 years old when I first heard her tell the story. Sandy Smith was 13 years old in 1951 when her church young women's group planned a camp to Darby Campground. Newly purchased, this would be the first year they would use Darby, but after the lightning strike, many felt like they should sell it. 50 girls and 6 leaders piled into cars and trucks for the 2-hour drive to Darby. Fred Miller came with them as an experienced hiker and Boy Scout leader. It was because of his skill that only 5 deaths occurred and not more. The girls were excited to go to Darby, and Mr. Miller led them on a hike on the second day. It was a beautiful day for the 7-mile hike up to the caves. But as happens in the Darby National Forest, the weather can change very quickly, and it did on this day. First light rain, then hail, then heavy rain. Fred Miller was ushering the last of the girls out of the cave, and it was raining hard. He cautioned Mrs. Horse not to lean up against that tree when suddenly, crack, thunder and lightning. Lightning struck the tree, killing Mrs. Horst immediately. And then, just as soon, just as loud, just as close, another lightning strike. The lightning had sheared through a large branch of that tree, almost all the way through. Girls were screaming. They had been thrown and knocked unconscious. Fred Miller and another leader who happened to be a nurse had also been thrown, but they immediately jumped into action because of their medical backgrounds. They started to revive the girls. Many of the girls had to be revived multiple times. Sandy Smith and her friends were also hit by lightning as they were sitting about 20 feet farther from the tree and Mrs. Horst. They were hit as the lightning traveled through the ground, and Sandy was struck on her leg through her Levi's. Mr. Miller asked Sandy, her friend Sandy Hancock, and 3 other girls to hike back down to the camp and let those leaders know what had happened so they could go to the next town and find help. These 5 girls hiked back this rugged trail. It was still raining. They were panicked. They stopped for a minute to pray, and the rain lessened. Mr. Miller and Nurse Richmond continued to work on the girls, continued to revive them. As they revived a girl, they would teach her the technique to revive another girl. They worked, and they saved all but 5 girls and the 1 leader. This group hiked back down the trail to the main camp and loaded back into the cars and trucks for the drive to Driggs. Farmers from Driggs came to help, and the terrain was so rugged, in 1951, the only way they could bring the bodies back down from the mountain was on horseback. The ladies in Driggs were able to make a hot soup for lunch for these terrified girls as they waited in the church for their parents to make the drive from Idaho Falls and pick them up. It was 1951. They had to rely on the radio to bring news of the tragedy. As they were loading into the cars and trucks, one lone girl came down that hiking trail towards camp. Her sister was still crying because they had had to leave her for dead after trying multiple times to revive her. She, alone, had come to consciousness in the meadow, and at first thought she was dead when she realized she was surrounded by burned bodies. Her hair was singed, her clothes were burned, but she was walking alive back down into the camp. My grandparents didn't own a car in 1951, but their neighbors offered to go up to Driggs and get their daughter, Sandy Hancock, and Sandy Smith, and bring both Sandys home. None of the parents knew until they arrived in Driggs at the church whose daughter had been spared. When my mother came home, her extended family was there to meet and hug her. They were so glad that her injuries were not worse. Her Aunt Shirley said, "I never would have forgiven myself for helping you earn money to go to this camp if you hadn't been okay." They were so glad that it wasn't worse compared to many of the girls, including her friend Gwen. Sandra didn't sleep well that night. There was a thunderstorm in Idaho Falls. Her mother tried to comfort her all night long. The next day she lay in bed. But the day after that, she got up and went back to normal. Part of her went back to normal, and part of her tried to forget. She felt she had learned the power of prayer, but she had so many questions about why they had been struck by lightning and why some girls were spared and others were not. She moved on with her life. She finished high school, she went to college, and became a youth leader herself. She went camping again in other mountains, but never back to Darby. Her friend Gwen never returned to Darby either, but Sandy Hancock did go back, years later as a leader, when she herself had become a nurse. Sandy uses her story to help young women understand about strength and hope. She explains to them that fear can be conquered, sadness can be healed, and prayers can be answered. Sandy used this in her life to live well. She did not let the fear conquer her. She did not pass this fear on down to her children. In fact, she did what most others would not dare to do. She took us camping. Thank you.
I wrote a memoir several years ago now, and it was a childhood memoir, and so I want to read a couple of little excerpts from it. In November, I had won a contest when I was in the 5th grade. It was one where we sold the most magazines, and I won the contest. And my dad suggested, he was the principal, and he suggested that I take my prize money and use it to buy the family Christmas presents, which I did. I got Mama and Grandma Blaine each a glass lemonade pitcher, a game for Mary, bead necklaces for Sherry Kay and Connie, and 2 nice hunting lives, one for Daddy and one for Grandpa Blaine. Although it was only October, I was ready except for buying a baby gift for David. The order book didn't have one. In November, Grandma and Grandpa Blaine came over from Mighton to visit us. We lived in Roosevelt. Grandpa didn't seem to be his usual self. He became agitated. As we visited and played with Sherry Kay and Connie, those are my 2 little sisters, he suddenly headed for the front door saying he was sick. Instead of making the door, he vomited a little bit on the carpet in the entryway, and after sitting a few minutes outside, he said he felt better, and he and Grandma left for Mighton. When I got home from school the following day, I learned the terrible news. Grandpa went to start his car in the morning, and when he didn't come inside, Grandma checked on him. She found him lying by the car, dead from a heart attack, which Mama and Daddy realized began at our house the day before. Towards evening, I saw Daddy go into Mama's bedroom where he kept his clothes. I knocked on the door and he opened it. "Daddy, what shall I do with the hunting knife that I got for Grandpa?" A noise, like a bird cry, escaped from his throat, and he quickly wiped his eyes. "You can give them both to me, Diane. It'll be all right." I wanted to hug him, cry with him, let him know that I loved Grandpa Blaine too, but I didn't. I stood awkwardly watching him for a moment, and then he closed the door, and I went to my bedroom and cried for Grandpa Blaine and for Daddy. The other incident took place way before. I probably should have read it sooner, but anyway, it was when I was 4 years old, and we were still living in Mighton at that time. My dad was the principal of the elementary school there in Mighton, and my mother was a teacher, and I had an older sister 2 years older than me, Mary, and my mother put her into school early so she could go back to teaching, so I was just 4, and that meant that I got to stay with my grandmother and grandfather that lived up the street, the one I was talking about. Grandma and Grandpa didn't spend much time with me during the early part of the day, but both were up before 6 o'clock in the morning. Grandpa fired up the living room stove, so it was toasty warm when I appeared at 7:30, just in time to dry the breakfast dishes for Grandma. I hated doing dishes at home, but loved doing them at her house. Because they didn't have running water, Grandpa installed a hand pump in the kitchen. They had an outhouse, which I first thought was a wonderful adventure, but soon hated. If Mary and I were staying over for a weekend, Grandma put a slop jar out in the night in the closet that separated the guest bedroom and their bedroom. In the mornings, Grandpa fixed things, fed chickens, cut grass, and weeded his garden. After lunch, when his chores were done, he walked up the street to the Mighton Saloon and watched men play pool. He stayed a short time and was back by 1:30 or so. I knew when he arrived home I'd have his attention for the whole afternoon. That's when the fun began, with each day with the 2 of us sitting on the couch playing cards. He taught me rummy, 7-up, casino, double solitaire, and when we tired of those games, he introduced me to the provocative world of poker. "She's too little and her mother won't like her learning that stuff," protested Grandma. But Grandpa simply replied, "Danny," that was my nickname, "Danny's a smart little girl and she can do it." And I did, probably becoming one of a handful of 4-year-old poker players in the world. I soon knew all about full houses, flushes, straights, and what beat what. Stud poker, jacks or better, high-low, we did them all. Grandpa taught me blackjack last, and it was soon our favorite. He'd laugh heartily as I added my cards and responded loudly with, "Hit me," or "I'll stay." He never let me win, and I didn't at first, but one day I trounced him and he was delighted. A real Barnum and Bailey circus came to Roosevelt, which is 10 miles from Mighton. Grandpa and I went to see it. We saw trained tigers and lions, a tightrope walker, a pretty lady who rode way up on the back of an elephant. Grandpa bought me a snow cone and some cotton candy, which made me rather sick to my stomach. Just as we were about to leave, a man at one of the game booths called to us. For 10 cents, Grandpa could play a shell game. He paid the money, and the man moved 3 shells around and then stopped. And he said, "Which one hides the rock?" Grandpa pointed at one and was right. The man had to pay him 20 cents. Grandpa won again, got paid again, and the 3rd time the man looked very upset as he paid the money. Then he moved the shells around for a long time, trying hard to confuse Grandpa. But again, it didn't work because Grandpa was able to pick the shell hiding the rock. The man snarled, "Why don't you get out of here?" Grandpa smiled at me and we left. No one could get the best of my grandpa, the smartest man I knew. I want to play a song about Grandpa.
Thank you, Danny. Okay, so we have Felicia Rose, maybe. Is that, which way did it go?
I'll read.
Okay, Felicia Rose and then Sherilyn Clark. That's awesome.
This is just a short poem. I wish Diane could sing it. Would you like to?
What's the tune? I don't know.
I don't know. I haven't come up with one.
Well, I can't sing it then.
I was going to leave that to you. Anyway, it's called Topography. Tonight, as I wash the wound on your forearm, guide cotton swabs through narrow channels of blood, remove pebbles of crust from banks of swollen flesh, the result of melanoma excision, I admire your skin. Once smooth as slate and not so readily storied, it now boasts streams of wrinkles, tores of moles, lentigo scars. In bed, I walk its length and breadth with my fingers, inspect tiny patches of dryness, minute alluvial shifts. Years of hiking the berm of your sternum, crater of sacrum, hills, arches, ridges, and caves. I've learned to cull poisonous berries amid those benign. How wondrous this stunning land, which suffers mortal ravages and knows how to mend, its rocky eminences enhancing resplendent terrain.
This is a flash piece that I wrote entitled In the Distance You See It. You wind through the mountain canyon with lots of curves, trees, and steep cliffs. Gray mists hang over the trees, turning the usually vibrant greens to colorless pointed statues. Fog threatens to obscure your vision, but it isn't thick enough. Soft rock plays on the radio, but you don't really pay attention, even though you usually sing with wild abandon. Not today. Your baby coos in the background. The sounds invite the desire to nurture inside of you. The sounds remind you of your failures, like the time you scratched her leg with your wedding ring while trying to change a diaper. A strong gust blows dead leaves off the trees and whips them past your windshield. One catches your eye. It's a red maple leaf that seems like it dances as it flips and twirls past. The leaf gets stuck in your windshield wiper. Your eyes flick back and forth between the road and the trapped leaf. Shuddering and flapping, the leaf tries to break free. You frown. Tension clenches your chest until finally the wind hits the leaf just right and it slides up your windshield and over your car. You take a breath. Freedom. Relief fills you, distracting you from the deeper pain for a moment. But it returns. It always returns. You grip the steering wheel harder, frustrated. You don't know why it feels like there's a couple 1,000-pound weights on your chest every morning. You don't know why you cry in the shower or why food is a chore, to say nothing of dishes and laundry. Choosing what to wear makes you want to curl up in a hole and disappear. Your spouse is understanding, too understanding. No one but you hears the darkness whispering in the back of your brain or feels the disdain you hold for others, for yourself. You reach the summit and almost ceremoniously, the fog and mists part. In the distance you see it, a sharp curve with a plunging cliff on the outside bend. The angle of the curve isn't enough to slow down for. Still you wonder how many cars have dived off it and careened into the deep abyss. There isn't a barrier, so probably not many. Your car begins the descent. Your eyes lift to watch the approaching curve. Time slows and the music fades as the curve gets closer and closer. Tension rises in your shoulders. Failure, worthless, stuck, almost there. You release the steering wheel as the tires grind on the gravel and dirt. You fly for a few measly seconds, free. The promise of blackness brings peace, a release from all your sadness and pain. Your shoulders relax. The tension in your face eases. Air catches in your gut from the free fall. Change from the spare drink holder, float around, free and unrestrained. You could fly like that forever. But the car lands eventually. The shocks squeal, a crack, and the inside of your car explodes. You are driven down into your seat as the airbag blossom slams into your face, blasts your head backwards. The ice scraper jumps up and spins in the air. Lipstick and pens and your checkbook fly from your open purse and you join the dance. The car spins and twists, squealing, jolting, bouncing. The safety belt cuts into your chest, yanking you this way, then that. Your arms flail, bruising and splitting from the makeshift projectiles. Up and down isn't relevant anymore. Soon sweet, sweet blackness. You can feel it coming. You open your arms to embrace it. Your baby screams. Your baby. You blink. The curve is still ahead. You bite your lip as it approaches. All muscles tense. Your heart pounds in your ears, drowning out the radio. Your hands shake, unsure. Sweat slides down the side of your face. Your breath comes out in quick bursts. Your baby sighs. You turn the steering wheel. Thank you.
Oh, I think there'll be plenty of time, yes? Yeah. Okay, I'm going to actually read a couple poems. You want to join?
Yeah, I'd like to read those.
Oh, what's your name?
Erin, E-R-I-N.
Aaron. Very good. Anybody else? What's your name?
Hunter.
Hunter. Thank you, Hunter. Aaron. And then was there kind of a partial hand over here?
Oh, I signed her up already. Weird.
Are you Riley or Ashley?
I'm Ashley.
You're signed up. Anybody else? Tim? Favor us? Okay. I would like to just read a couple poems. What can't I read?
Go ahead, you read and I'll read one for you guys as well.
I wanted to read something for, for Valentine's Day. I'm really, really lucky because I can write up just a kind of an amateurish poem, and she's like really flattered. It's really cool. It's really sort of it's like a magic trick. Okay, so this is a poem that things have just been I've been thinking a lot about my parents lately, and I've been just jotting things down, and this is a kind of a poem that came to mind. This is called "Listening In on the Grown-Ups." When I was a kid, I mastered the art of listening in on the grown-ups. It was not easy listening in on them. Think back and remember how grown-ups employed a kind of all-seeing radar, which alerted them to the presence of furtive, nosy children. My dad could detect an eavesdropping kid at 20 meters. Right in the middle of dishing about my cousin's unquenchable drug habit, Dad leans back, cranes his neck, and squints into the darkness of the hallway. Then he raises a hand, nods in the direction of the discovered kid as a silent signal for all the grown-ups to turn their talk to topics less titillating. My brother was stealthy, able to infiltrate the perimeter of any talking circle, but he listened too attentively, gave himself away, and the grown-ups drove him off. My sister used charm. She cooed and adorably gambled her way into the circle, but then the grown-ups forgot to gossip, begging her instead to do "I'm a Little Teapot." I alone could creep beneath their tripwires to insinuate myself within earshot and monitor their grapevine broadcasts like the Dutch Underground or Viet Cong. Indifference was my secret. Pretend you could give a shit about grown-up talk. Play with your action figures and army men with a sort of indurated disregard for their blah, blah, blah. Become the background noise they need to cover their hushed tones. But listen too. You must do both at the same time. Takes years of practice. Yeah, she's using again. Oh, of course it's not his. It's Hodgkin's. Keep that to yourself, though. All the juiciest scoops came from my news bureau. They figured I didn't hear or care, just thought I was over there pretending to be G.I. Joe or Han Solo. Pro tip, never let it register. Never acknowledge anything. If your mom whispers about your best friend's folks filing for DIVORCE, don't go all quiet. Don't look over like, what? It's the deadliest of giveaways. What are you doing back there? What are you gawking at, Leroy? Go play. The grown-ups are talking. Now that I am a grown-up myself, who sits in circles where secrets are traded, the others rely on me to run their counterintelligence. Because I can detect a kid who's listening in, the sideways glances, the too quiet play. I can feel the slight change in air pressure when a kid slips into a room behind a chair. Having mastered the art of listening in on the grown-ups, I have all the finest tripwires. Okay, I'm going to read one that's a little bit. Well, this is yeah, it's a little bit blue. It's not PG-13. It's to the south of that. It'll be okay. Amanda was worried that one of her coworkers would show up, and then things would get a little weird. But so this is for Amanda on Valentine's Day. Whiskey dick, they say, is a condition arising, or not, from imbibing too much liquor. One cannot perform, one loses his erectile integrity. But I could get it on with Amanda were I buck naked and blind stinking drunk in the polar vortex. And then this is really the only poem I count as any good for Amanda, and this was in my fly fishing book, Fly Fishing Poetry. Cutthroat trout swims up from the stream bed, and the way you know it's a cutthroat is the red on its throat. Red, not unlike the color of the lips of the lover who waits, the girl who makes you want to cut the trip short.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, we have a whole bunch of readers now. We have, first we'll go with Riley Anderton, and then Ashley M., and then we'll go from there.
All right, Riley.
I don't know how I follow a poem about whiskey dick, but I will try my best. All right, so I don't have a title for this poem, which in hindsight might have been a good idea. But this is just a poem that I wrote after having a really good conversation with a friend, and it's kind of me imagining if the words that we speak were something that we could actually see and feel. So yeah, this is my poem. So, her dull brown eyes swirl as she opens her mouth to confess. The words leak and pus from her foaming mouth, gushing in waves down her spittle glistened chin. The words slither across the naked skin of her neck in a dance to seduce my eye. The words scale her chest, moving rapidly until they coil down her hair-prickled arm and pool in her hand that rests on my thigh. We are on a precipice. The words she's uttered plead to leave their former vessel for their chosen host, me. As if the offensive words sense my plight, they claw their way off of her skin onto mine own. As soon as the first word lands, I'm bombarded with a monologue ravishing my skin. The words weave up my leg, gnawing on exposed flesh, leaving welts of disdain. The words rope around my chest, constricting the air supply and splintering my ribs. They pierce my ears until their echo resounds in the abandoned cavity that is now my skull. Her words rip the lids off my eyes, forcing me to confront her dull brown eyes brimmed with anguish. She feels lighter while I lay deformed. Thank you.
So I think I'm going to read 3 poems that I look back at and are kind of an innocent timeline of a 20-year-old's life. Everything about you is enticing. Your body, your kisses, your mind. Dating you is comfortable, yet exciting. The way you look, it's masculine and handsome, yet soft and inviting. Your eyes are devouring. Time slows to a crawl as I stare. Your kisses, they are gentle and fierce. Like a kitten batting a ball, your silhouette is peaceful yet invigorating. Sometimes boys will invite you over, tell you they love you, ask you what you want for dinner, sweet talk you out of your clothes, then watch the game. When you inhale carbon monoxide, you experience euphoria. But too much of it deprives your brain and organs from oxygen by replacing the oxygen in your bloodstream with itself, resulting in a breathable suffocation. When you date someone you think you love, you experience euphoria. But too much of it deprives your personality and productivity from full potential by replacing your time and space with him, resulting in a breathable suffocation. When I found out my apartment was full of carbon monoxide, I learned that that's not the only thing suffocating me.
Great, thank you for reading. All right, so we're going to go with Aaron and Hunter in that order, and then Star, just take it from there when they're done. Thank you very, very much for coming, everybody. Thank you so much. It's it's Valentine's Day. There's probably some cooler things you could do. But thanks for joining us. Please eat the cookies. Please buy a book, and please come back next time when we will have Ben Gunsberg. Great guy, great poet. And he's actually releasing a book, or has released a book.
Yeah, it's out now.
Yeah, that will be probably almost as good as this was. So, come to that. We'll see. We'll just have to see. So please come to that. When we're finished, please take your chairs and just stack them like that over there, and feel free to hang around as long as the library is open for until 9. And thanks again. Take it away, Aaron.
All right, Aaron.
Hello?
Hi.
Just have to pull my phone out like a real 21st century fool. Okay. So, excited to be here. Just gonna ramble for a second to be less nervous. This This is Happy Valentine's Day. This is nothing romantic, but I'm grateful for my partner. So this is titled Alphabetized Nonsense. Purple ambience falls, belittling the room I stand. Thoughts culminate, daggers rage through headspace. Evening is frantic, the gate leaks hubris, and the indecent descends on forever. Juxtapose this with a feeling. Manipulate the lever's pathway, as it takes time to mutilate your serenity, and has mercy for nothing at all. This is obvious. Closing your eyes is a quintessential way to halt the ravenous nighttime, to subdue the moon. From its glaring presence, trample your world, separate yourself from the ugly hue of yesterday. Listen again. The voracious whisper can hardly be heard, and surely be seen. Through X-ray, your Zion awaits.
Here's just a short little poem that I wrote recently, and it's titled 1133. Two men stand in the middle of a crosswalk, red light reflected in their eyes and countenances. In unison, they project cutting opinions on each other's closed ears about their personalities, accomplishments, and close friends. One man finishes yelling and crosses without the other. He stays, face red as the traffic light. The light turns green.
As Chad said, thank you for coming tonight. And Pam, my cousin in Idaho Falls, wrote about that. So we have to talk. She has it in a book. You have to see it.
I've read it.
Oh my gosh. Connie.
Yes.
Ottoson. Yeah. That's my cousin. And Amanda always inspires me. And by the way, you all did. This has been really a great night. What some good readings, huh? Thank you all for participating. Amanda among the bones. Only 1 year in your memory, the premise. Rotting footbridge, meadow snow, sun on the deer. In the waist-high grass, hands on hips, this boy, this lost watch, corrosion. Buried halfway, mounded, all the humans who had gone to rust, a pile of nothing you could ever fathom. Then a silhouette, a scraggle of fist, deflection of stride, clamp of iron wrist. Is this how the boy will arrive, weeks into your life, only a year long? Looking for Ruby and Valentine's, red pout lips, a boy who won't live past the last inoculation. When you write about bones, your own son arrives and arrives, one dream after the next. Oh, beautiful, oh, meadow mother, decades parse the grass, part the water, cross the bridge, rising up from buried earth, your prodigal will recognize the bones that parted for his birth, the watch, the bloody rust, the silhouette, this meadow where you left him in a spray of jet black letters on the pages of your book. And I have a slight revision from one of my poems for a group. And my poetry group said, oh, that reminds me of Robert Hayden's Those Winter Sundays. Well, that's because I wrote the title, and then I realized after I wrote the poem that that's what it was. So here it is. All those weekday evenings. After Dad died and Mother went to work full time, we kids aged 9, 11, 13, 2 hours off the school bus, rattled around that big old farmhouse, converged on her as she came in the door, set the bags of groceries down, put her apron on, and started to cook. We stood at the stove, trying her scattered attention, her hand on the spoon, on the saucepan, slicing our words one child at a time, tucking us into her basket of mothering, soft as a cloth over hot rolls, buttery, delicate, everyone's favorite, dark golden crust just waiting for that first hungry bite, our teeth all set, imagining how she'd melt in our mouths, give us her undivided self the way she never had, we the last 3 of 9. She was there once, always, and then rarely, so we all converged, and now her apron, tucked away inside my selfish kitchen, still evokes that butter scent, so delicate and golden. You are all so golden. Good night. Thanks again for coming.